InStitches show. A little while ago we made a striped poncho with fringe crochet tutorial, and we'll link that in the description box down below if you missed it. Several of you asked if we could add a hood to it. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to show you how to make a really simple hood that you can attach to our striped poncho pattern, or really any poncho you've made that has a closed open, sort of like a one sort whole neck opening, a whole neck opening hole, you know what I'm saying. Basically, if you've made a poncho that has a neck hole, you can make a hood to go with it. So let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, we'll head on over to the craft table and we will stitch up a hood for our ponchos together. In order to add a hood to an existing poncho, you want more of the same yarn and hopefully the same colors that you made your original poncho out of. For a child's hood, you're going to want around 96 yards. For an adult hood, anywhere between 112 and 144 yards, and I'll explain that hood sizing in a moment when we get into the tutorial. For this particular poncho, I used a bulky weight size 5 yarn in acrylic, so that's exactly what I've got here. You're also going to want to use the same hook you used when you made your original poncho. I used a 6mm hook for this poncho, also known as a J or a 10 in the US, a size 4 in the UK, and you're going to want a pair of scissors and a yarn needle. A measuring tape might be handy. It's not super necessary, but if you've got it lying around, it might be handy to have here with the rest of your stuff. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. Keep your hooks and tools handy with Lula and Gwen in this cute zippered pouch by your InStitches friends. Purchase a pouch and help out our show. The Teespring link can be found down below. I'm going to begin with the same color that matches the neck area of my poncho, and so for me that's this nice rich purple color. We're all going to begin with a slip knot, and since we're making this specifically to match the striped poncho we made, if you made a child-sized poncho, then you're going to want to chain 50 chains. If you made an adult-sized poncho along with me, you're going to want to chain 58. And if you made the larger adult poncho with those sort of directions we had in the description box for a slightly larger size, you're going to want to start with 74 chains. So basically, it's the number of stitches or chains in the neck area of your poncho plus 2. So once again, 50 for a child, 58 for an adult, or 74 if you made the larger version of our striped poncho with fringe. Once you've chained the correct number of foundation chains, we're going to begin with a skip. We're going to skip those first 3 chains and find the 4th and double crochet into it. So we're just double crocheting in every single chain and every single stitch. This is nice and simple. Double crochet used throughout. Double crochet into every chain all the way back, and at the end of row 1 you'll have 48 stitches for a child's sized hood, 56 stitches for the adult small to large size, or you'll have 72 stitches if you're making the larger hood size. And again, that's to match those directions we had in the description box. The chain 3 will count as a stitch, so make sure you count that when you're adding up all your stitches at the end of row 1. At the end of row 1, you'll have 48 stitches, including your turning chains over here. So these little turning chains, the chain 3, that counts as a stitch. So 48 for a child, 56 for an adult small to large, or for an extra large adult sized hood, 72. From here on out, you're just going to chain 3 and turn your work and double crochet in every stitch except this one. So I just want to point out this first stitch here, if you pull back you can see it, that is already accounted for because your chain 3 counts as a double crochet. So always skip that first stitch and double crochet into the next stitch. You're going to double crochet in every single stitch. Make sure you also double crochet into the top of the chain 3 from the previous row. When you get up there, I'll show you what that looks like at the end of row 2 here. And you're going to crochet 20 rows in total for an adult-sized hood, either size, and 18 rows in total for a child-sized hood. You can make it all one color, so just chain 3, turn, double crochet in every stitch for every single row. Every row will have the same number of stitches in it, so 48 for a child and 56 or 72 for an adult, depending on whether you're making the smaller version or the larger version. And that won't change, so every row will have the same stitch count. Don't forget your chain 3 counts as a stitch. You can also opt to stripe it. So if you want to stripe your hood to match the striping pattern that you made in your original poncho, definitely do that. That's what I'm going to do. I'll show you how to change colors here in a little bit once I've got a couple of rows more worked of this pretty purple. And then you can just do whatever you want. You can use up the yarn you've got left over from the project. You can make a crazy looking hood, or like I said, just make it all one color. 20 rows for an adult and 18 rows for a child. When you get to the end of a row, don't skip the chain 3. Remember that chain 3 counts as a stitch. So you might want to sort of turn it towards you. You're going to find the top of it. So top chain, slip your hook through the top of that chain 3 and double crochet. So your last stitch in each row gets worked into the top of the turning chains from the row before. And the first stitch of every row, because your chain 3 counts as a stitch, you always skip that first stitch right there because the chain 3 is using it already. So always begin every row by double crocheting into the next stitch. So that's it. Chain 3 turn for every single row. That begins it. Skip over that first stitch, double crochet into the next stitch, double crochet in each stitch across, double crochet into the top of the chain 3 from the previous row. And once I finish this row, I'm going to show you how I'm going to change colors. It's the same sort of method that we used for the poncho, but just in case you're new here, I'm going to give you a little insight into an easy way to change colors. When you've finished a stripe of color, I've worked 3 rows in purple and I'm ready to change color now. Finish your last row. Don't forget that last stitch is worked into the top of the chain 3. You can snip your yarn and fasten off. So pull that tail back through that loop on your hook, pull it in nice and tight. Turn your work. You can weave in your tails if you want to, or work over top of them. I like to work over top of them. Grab the color you're switching to. For me, it's going to be this light green color. Start with a slip knot. And you're going to insert your hook into that first stitch, so the top of that last stitch you made, so not the knot. There's a little knot there. You're slipping your hook into the actual stitch. Join your yarn with a slip stitch and chain 3 to begin. And this also really helps to demonstrate how that chain 3 uses that first stitch. So we've attached our yarn, chained 3, that's the first stitch now in our new row. I like to pull both my tails to the inside of my work, helps keep my edges nice and smooth. And then I just start double crocheting in every single stitch all the way across. And that is how you can very easily and tidily change colors. So you can work over top of your short tails or opt to weave them in with your yarn needle. Either way, you've knotted off your last color and you've started your new color with a knot, so that whole stripe isn't going to come undone. And it looks nice and neat and tidy. So there you go. That's how you change color. Work your hood, 20 rows for an adult, 18 for a child, and I'll catch up with you at the end. I have completed 20 rows for my hood using double crochet stitch throughout. If you're making it for a child, once again, 18 rows is probably good enough, but you want to measure it from top to bottom. You should have at least 12 inches or 30 centimeters of hood for an adult, around 27 centimeters or just under 11 inches for a child. If you're over, that's fine. If you don't have it tall enough yet, go ahead and add a couple more rows. Now we want to seam up the top of our hood to actually turn it into a hood shape. So you have 2 options here. You can, if you have a lot of yarn left over, single crochet or slip stitch through each pair of stitches all the way across, in which case you don't want to fasten off, you just want to chain 1, turn, and then start single crocheting or slip stitching through each set. So for example, you would pick up a set of stitches, making sure to get the top of that chain 3. That's where you would start. You would single crochet, looks something like this, or slip stitch, whatever you like, and then just pick up the next set of stitches. And you would do this all the way across, and that would create a nice seam all the way to the end of your hood. I am going to use the whip stitch method where you sew. So I don't have a lot of this yarn left over, and I do want to have enough to sew on the bottom of my hood to my poncho. So I'm going to go ahead and use the whip stitch method, which is sewing, and it uses up a lot less yarn. So you would fasten off if you're going to sew, not if you're going to crochet, but if you're going to sew. And I'm just going to pull whatever is left of my yarn through there so that I can use whatever's left to sew along the bottom of my hood to my poncho. Then I'm going to grab my yarn needle. I'm going to thread up my tail. And it's the exact same process. So I'm going to grab the top of the chain 3 from one side and come through the stitch at the very edge of the row on the other side. And there's really nothing to this. You're just whip stitching. Whip means that you're always going over top of the seam in the same direction. So I go back to the stitch furthest away from me and then do the next set of stitches. You don't want to sew too tightly, but you don't want to sew too loosely either. And then back again through the next set of stitches. And through the next set of stitches. And you just do this all the way across. When you get across to the other end of your hood, so whether if you're single crocheting or slip stitching, just fasten off once you get to the end. If you're whip stitching like I am, just make a small knot. So it's essentially the same thing as fastening off. And then in both cases, you want to just weave your tail in through some of those stitches. And I'm just going to bring it down. There we go. And you can just weave it in back and forth a couple times through some of those stitches. Now, if you don't like the way the seam looks across the top of your hood, you can flip the hood inside out. But if you do like the way the seam looks, then you can leave the hood as is. So that's entirely up to you. And I'm just going to weave back and forth a couple times. This does not tend to want to come undone. And you can trim any excess. And now you've got a hood. So if you open it back up, you've got an absolute hood shape going here. This bottom edge here is what we're going to attach to the edge of our collar or around the neck of our poncho. The number of stitches you should have running across the bottom of your hood should match the number of stitches that runs around the inside of the neck of your poncho. So the points, or the very edges of your hood, should both be sharing this center stitch. So what you want to do is find the front of your poncho. This is where point number 1 gets attached to, and then you're going to sew all the way around through each set of foundation stitches or foundation chains all the way around the neck of your poncho so that the other point of your hood shares the same stitch. If you want, you can work starting on either side of that front stitch, but I do like the way that looks when they both share it. And because we were very careful to make sure we had the right number, or we started with the same number of stitches, the whole thing should fit together. If you're new to sewing, you can always just sort of go all the way around both pieces and kind of clip them into place or pin them into place so that it's a little easier to maneuver while you're sewing. I've threaded up my needle. I should have more than enough yarn now to sew this whole thing together. I'm going to select the middle front stitch of my neck. So this is the neck piece of my poncho. and I'm going to knot this yarn into place. I will be sewing, or I should say weaving in all of my tails afterwards, so this isn't going to show, but I want to make sure that it's good and anchored and it's not going to go anywhere. Now I'm going to start with the edge of the first stitch, or the first foundation chain of the bottom of my hood. So once again, we're using the bottom of our hood and we're going to sew it into place, going through each set of foundation chains all the way around both pieces. So neck edge of poncho, neck edge of hood. Line them up. You can feel your way around, just find the very next set of stitches. I like to just always peel the thing apart and make sure that I'm moving on to the next one and then the next one. Run your needle through the bottom of both of those next sets of stitches. Don't sew too tightly. So there's the next one. And there's the next one. This will take a little bit of time, but it's definitely worth it to make sure that you're lining up the same sets of stitches, because that way you know that it'll work out. You won't end up with a lopsided hood. So just take your time, work your way around sewing, and I'll see you on the other side. Once you've sewn all the way around, you should not see any gaps in your stitches if you take a look at it. Both of your ends should kind of meet back in the center. I like to tie another knot between those two ends just to kind of neaten things up. And then trim my yarn. And take a moment to weave in my little tails. Then we can put an edging around the outside edge of our poncho hood, and that'll make it deeper, and it'll also finish off this edge a little neater. This next part is optional. So if you like the way your hood has gone on, you don't mind the edging of it, you think it kind of looks just fine the way it is, you feel that your hood is deep enough, especially if you're making this for a child, then consider yourself finished. This is the end of this tutorial. But if you want to neaten up the edge a little bit, or you just want to add a little bit of extra depth, I'm going to show you how you can add some stitches around the outside edge of your hood. So go ahead and grab any kind of color you want to use. I'm going to edge my hood in this deep green because I absolutely love it. We're going to begin with a slip knot, and then you're going to pivot your hood so that you're looking at, this is the bottom front corner, so here's our open hood, and you're going to look at the edge of what is row 1 of your hood, and you're just going to slip your hook through the edge of the stitch or the chain, whatever it is that's there. Every other row will be chain 3, and the rows in between that will be actual double crochet stitches. We're going to join our yarn with a slip stitch, chain 1, and through that same place that you joined your yarn, you're going to single crochet. And we're going to single crochet because this adds a nice even trim look around the outside edge of the hood. Each row is each row is a double crochet. So in the edge of each row, we want to work 2 single crochet stitches. So as you work, you sort of identify the edge of a row. I have 3 rows of purple here, so I know that I've done my first row. Across this next row, I want to work 2 single crochet. Try to get your hook to go through the stitch, not around it. So through the stitch, not around it, because if you work around the outside stitch, you're going to create a bit of a gap. So try to work through the loops that are there. That's a chain 3, so I'm going to just try to crochet a single crochet by picking up a chain, one of the chains along that chain 3, and I'm going to do it twice because I want to work 2 single crochet along the edge of each row. And it's going to make things look nice and neat and tidy. you can move on to the next rows. There's no, like I say, real fine science to this. You just want to try and evenly work 2 single crochet through the edge of each of those rows all the way around. So put your hook through the stitch, not around it, and just take your time single crocheting around the edge of your hood. I've single crocheted around the edge of my hood. I've tried to work at least 2 single crochet into the edge of each row of double crochet. It doesn't have to be a perfect even number or an odd number, as long as your hood opening doesn't feel pinched or ripply, then you've worked the right number of single crochet. So there is no correct stitch count here. At the end, you're just going to finish your last single crochet, and into the same place you worked your last stitch, just slip stitch, and that'll just sort of finish off that row edge nice and neat. Snip your yarn, fasten off, and then you can go ahead and weave that tail in back and forth underneath that last row of single crochet. And there you go! One easy to assemble hood that you can add to your poncho, and it'll help keep you warm. So you've made a cozy poncho that much cozier, and just in time for Halloween. We hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda InStitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have an awesome week. Bye everybody!
Hi everybody! Mr. InStitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.